Most of us live with a version of joy that is entirely dependent on what's happening around us. If things are going well, then we feel good. But as soon as things get hard, that joy is often the first casualty. And somewhere along the way, we've just accepted that as the way that it works. That joy is essentially a thermometer that rises and falls with the temperature of our circumstances. But then you read Philippians, and that whole assumption falls apart. Paul wrote this letter from prison. That's not a metaphor. It was actual confinement while awaiting a trial that could end his life in execution. He was alone, he was uncertain about the future, and had every circumstantial reason to be undone. And the letter reads like it was written by someone who has found something his circumstances simply cannot touch. The joy here is not performed. It's not the spiritual equivalent of telling everyone you're fine when you're not. It is the real thing coming from inside a prison cell. So the question I want to sit with before we go any further is simply this: how? Because if it's just personality, if Paul was simply wired for optimism in a way most of us aren't, then this letter is interesting, but not particularly useful. But I think Paul has something underneath the joy that most of us are living without, or at least are living with a much thinner version of than we realize. The gospel has actually per- permeated, not as a theological position that Paul holds, but as a living conviction that he has been formed by. The rescue is real. The story ends well. When this life is over, he will be with Christ, which he says elsewhere is far better than anything that this life offers, which means the worst thing his circumstances can do is accelerate his arrival, something that he actually wants. When the ending is that secure, the middle loses some of its power to undo you. I want to ask you something directly this morning. How deeply has the gospel actually permeated in you? Not do you believe it theologically. I'm going to assume that you do, but has it actually landed in the place where your joy lives? Because I've had seasons where the gospel was a fact I believed and seasons where it was the ground that I was standing on. And those two seasons felt completely different from the inside. The difference wasn't my circumstances, it was how deeply the thing underneath them had taken root. Paul's joy wasn't circumstantial because his hope wasn't circumstantial, and neither is yours. If you've actually let the gospel land where it was always meant to. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me before the noise today. This week we're in Philippians 4, and today the question is simply this: how deep does it go? Our God loves you more deeply than you could possibly imagine, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.